Welcome to the GSMC Car Podcast, the show that takes you on a journey to the automotive world. We talk about the latest news, from new makes and models to new technology to all of the must-have options available. Whether you're a fan of the old classics, love the latest models and technology, or have never met a vehicle you didn't want to work on, the GSMC Car Podcast has something for every car enthusiast.
Thank you for tuning into the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, David Lucy Mabel. Okay, welcome to this week's podcast, car lovers. Today, I am going to be talking about something that I am very passionate about. Not to say that I don't always talk about things that I'm passionate about, but I am particularly passionate about this week's topic. Today, we are going to be talking about Chrysler. Yes, I am actually very passionate about Chrysler. We are specifically going to be talking about Chrysler's Pacifica, a last-ditch attempt at Chrysler at being relevant. So, we are going to be talking about the new Chrysler Pacifica. We are going to be talking about Chrysler's lineup and how it's basically boiled down to just two vehicles here in the North American market. We are going to be talking about the history of Chrysler from the illustrious days of the Imperial to the struggling days of the K-Car to the odd days of the cab-forward design and now to the modern days of, well, Chrysler being a shell of its former self. And, of course, we are going to be talking about my opinion in segment 4 if you stay tuned to the end of the podcast. So, why don't we get started? Okay. So, the new Chrysler Pacifica. Okay, here's the lowdown on the Chrysler Pacifica. Basically, the Chrysler Pacifica replaced the long-running legendary Chrysler Town and Country. If you all are not familiar with the Chrysler Town and Country, which I would be very surprised if you weren't, but the Chrysler Town and Country has been a long-running minivan made by Chrysler since the 1980s. This is basically the first minivan. I mean, there was the Scout Scarab way back in the 1930s, but that was before everybody had a concept of a minivan. It's almost retrospective to call the Scout Scarab a minivan. But the Chrysler Town and Country, along with the Dodge Grand Caravan and the Plymouth Voyager, were basically the first minivans ever made. So they really ushered in a completely new class of vehicles when they came out. So the Chrysler Pacifica is coming and replacing the legendary Town and Country. There has been a Chrysler Pacifica in the past. The Chrysler Pacifica was Chrysler's early attempt at a crossover SUV way back in the early 2000s. You see, the car companies were coming out with different sorts of, I wouldn't say quirky's not the word for it, but different sorts of crossover SUVs back in the early 2000s. I mean, just an example, the Nissan Murano is an example of an early crossover SUV. The Pontiac Aztek was an early crossover SUV. The Buick Rendezvous was, an early attempt at a crossover SUV. So this was Chrysler's attempt. It was the Chrysler Pacifica. The Chrysler Pacifica, at least the crossover, only lasted one generation. It wasn't that great. The styling was, I always thought they looked like a bathtub, frankly, like an oversized Chrysler Crossfire. It was eh. That's what it was. It was eh. There wasn't anything special about the Chrysler Pacifica. I mean, it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't good either. So Chrysler, with their new minivan that they came out with a couple of years ago, they decided to revive the Chrysler Pacifica nameplate. And it has always dumbfounded me why Chrysler would do such a thing, because the nameplate is unsuccessful. Instead of continuing with the successful nameplate of the town and country that has basically cemented itself in the psyche of America, especially in, suburban America where people drive minivans, no, they decided to kill the successful name and bring back an unsuccessful name. Anyway, we're moving on. So, the competition for the Chrysler Pacifica, as one can imagine, is stiff. It is a minivan, and there are lots of minivans on the market. Let me just name a few. The Nissan Quest, the Toyota Sienna, the Honda Odyssey, and the Kia Sedona, all of which have a long-standing reputation for quality. And yes, even the Kia, because when we're talking about Chrysler quality, Kia is leaps and bounds ahead of Chrysler, which just 20 years ago, that would not have been the case. But today, Kia is way better than Chrysler could ever hope to be. Chrysler's Pacifica minivan and base model Voyager, I will get into this more when I talk about the lineup in the next segment. But basically, they brought back the Plymouth Voyager as the Chrysler Voyager, and it's basically the base model of the Pacifica. The Pacifica's lowest trim levels were moved down to the Voyager, and I guess when they decided to kill the Dodge Grand Caravan, they made it live on as the Chrysler Voyager, which is the base model of the Chrysler Pacifica. It's not as luxurious, in other words. Anyway, are revivals of old nameplates that weren't particularly well received and suffer from Chrysler's modern and long-standing quality issues. Ask anybody who owns a modern Chrysler today. You will find that they are not satisfied with their product. Chrysler quality, wow. Chrysler quality. Let's say a prayer for Chrysler quality. That's the only way I can put it. We need to say a prayer for Chrysler quality. I personally know. I used to work at a school with children, a few months ago before COVID-19 hit, and one of the parents, he was a very, very nice man. He had two daughters. He had this Chrysler 300. Which, for those of you who don't know, is a luxury sedan offered by Chrysler. And he had a really nice Chrysler 300 too. And he had it for about 3 years, and his dash was already beginning to warp because of the heat. He had gotten to the point where he was just sick of the car, and he brought it in to the dealership, and he traded it in for a Kia Optima. He's like, you know what? The Kia is not as nice as the Chrysler as far as the way it looks, but he's like, I know it's going to last because I know I'm not going to have to worry about my dash warping after 3 years in a Kia. His wife had a Jeep. Her Jeep was always in the shop. I've seen real world Chrysler quality issues. I'm not just saying that because it's the popular thing to not like Chrysler. I'm saying it because I've seen it. So, the Chrysler Pacifica is no different. It suffers from quality issues. When you have the Japanese who, honestly, if the Americans invented the minivan, the Japanese perfected it, and they brought it to fruition. You have the Nissan Quest, you have the Toyota Sienna, and you have the Honda Odyssey, which of all of these on the list is probably the best, especially the Honda Odyssey Elite model that comes with a built-in vacuum cleaner, folks. Chrysler's Pacifica cannot lay a claim to that. Chrysler, you can't touch these giants. The Toyota Sienna, the Nissan Quest, the Honda Odyssey, and the Kia Sedona, which is not as long-lived as these other three that I just mentioned, but is really making a name for itself, just like Kia is making a name for itself. So Chrysler is floundering, and it makes me very sad. Chrysler is the only American automaker with a minivan. Think of it. Chrysler now does not have any crossovers. Chrysler has one sedan. Chrysler doesn't have any SUVs. Chrysler has nothing besides a minivan and a car. And as you've heard in previous podcasts, and if you are paying attention to what's going on in the American car scene, you will find that all of the major American car companies, except Cadillac probably, is nixing the idea, or are nixing the idea, of a sedan. Nobody's buying sedans anymore. So they've decided to stop making sedans and focus on crossovers. And the other ones are focusing on plug-in hybrids and electric vehicles and other sorts of concepts that are going to be very common in the very near future. Chrysler's not doing any of that. The minivan that they have, the Pacifica, is offered in 3 body styles. It's offered in the Pacifica Hybrid, and the Voyager, which I mentioned is the base Pacifica. The Pacifica Hybrid is Chrysler's only hybrid vehicle. And if I'm not mistaken, I think that's Chrysler's only hybrid vehicle across all 4 of their brands. You have Chrysler, you have Dodge, you have Ram, and you have Jeep. I think that's the only Chrysler hybrid vehicle. And frankly, because it's a Chrysler, it's probably terrible. But we'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They have at least one hybrid vehicle. The Pacifica is terribly insipid, meaning boring. It doesn't live up to the Town and Country. And what makes me very sad is the fact, instead of being normal and bringing back another generation of the Chrysler Town and Country, Chrysler decided to do a terrible marketing strategy, kill the name that everybody knows and bring back a name that everybody hates. As if though people didn't already hate Chrysler enough. They just had to do something else to shoot themselves in the foot. So, yeah, Chrysler has dropped the ball yet again. It can't live up to the rivals, and it can't live up to the predecessor. Chrysler has dropped the ball so many times. Chrysler discontinued the Dodge Viper back in 2017, I believe. Chrysler doesn't have any crossovers. The only crossovers that I can think that are being offered by Chrysler from Jeep and Dodge. Jeep and Dodge are way more successful than Chrysler, which is funny because Chrysler is the name of the company. Chrysler is the parent company, and Dodge and Jeep are owned by Chrysler. You would find that the name of the company, that car should be the top of the line. I mean, it's odd. It really is, because there was a time that Chrysler used to be on level with Cadillac, and of course we'll discuss that when we discuss Chrysler's history in a couple of segments. But now Chrysler is just, it's a shell of its former self. I mean, really? 2 cars in the North American market? 2? And one is terribly antiquated. I mean, the 300C, this is the 2nd generation of the 300C. There was a 300C that came out, not including the classic ones. That's a different sort of car entirely. This is a revival of that. That came out, I believe, in the early 2000s. And then it ended, I believe, in, probably 2009. And then from then on, they had another 300C, which was basically based off of the first one's design, and they've been milking that same design for over 10 years. I mean, just do something, Chrysler. Do something. I mean, seriously, do something. So Chrysler's Pacifica, it doesn't strike me that it's going to do anything special. As you can tell, you don't see many of them on the road. As you can tell, you don't see them compared to Honda Odysseys, Toyota Siennas, Nissan Quests even, and Kia Sedonas. You don't see nearly as many of them as you see, or you don't see nearly as many Chrysler Pacificas as you see of those models, because they're more successful, they're more reliable. People know that they are good. Chrysler is going to have to try so hard to bring itself back to the level it used to be here in the United States after years, actually not even just years, decades of quality control issues. So please stay tuned for the next segment, in which I will talk about Chrysler's lineup. I have a rant about that too. And we're going to be talking about my opinion of Chrysler, if it already isn't obvious enough, in the fourth segment if you stay tuned. So please stay tuned after the break, and thank you once again for listening.
Are you a business owner? Someone interested in the latest news that might affect your business? Then check out the GSMC Business News Podcast, a show dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning business, technology, and the stock market. Get a head start on the day as we keep you updated on the latest goings-on Wall Street, money, jobs, and technology. The GSMC Business News Podcast has you covered.
Alrighty, folks, welcome back. Now we are going to be discussing Chrysler's lineup. Like I mentioned in the previous segment, with the Chrysler Pacifica, Chrysler's lineup in America has boiled down to two vehicles. Yes, one of those two vehicles is offered in three different styles, but it's still basically two vehicles. Two platforms, if you will. The Pacifica and its variants, and the Chrysler 300. I believe this spells the beginning of the end for Chrysler. Yeah. That's the only way I can look at it. I mean, if I were to make a list of car brands that I don't think are going to survive in the American market within the next 5-10 years, Chrysler is on that list. Chrysler is actually on the top of that list. If I were to just whip up a list right now off the top of my head, car manufacturers that aren't going to last in the American market. Yeah, Chrysler has been suffering from poor quality, poor reliability, and Jeep and Dodge are far more popular. Jeep is Chrysler's most successful mark. Let me define what a mark is. You've got the company, you've got basically that's the brand, and then you've got the mark that's under the company. So for example, Buick is a mark of GM. So Jeep is a mark of Chrysler because Chrysler is the parent company. There you have it. So yeah, Jeep is the most successful mark of Chrysler, especially with the fact that Jeep doesn't sell cars, obviously. Jeep sells crossover SUVs, and pickup trucks with the new Gladiator. Jeep sells things that people are interested in buying, and Jeep has a cult following. Have you ever met Jeep people? I mean, they are loyal to their Jeeps. I mentioned them in the Ford Bronco episode. I mean, yeah, they are very loyal to their Jeeps. So Jeep is unlikely going anywhere anytime soon. I foresee Jeep being sold to another company and being continued instead of Jeep floundering and going under and folding like the rest of Chrysler will eventually do at some point in the future. Chrysler is on death watch at this point. I mean, we are waiting for the phone call that Chrysler has passed on. That's how critical it's gotten. Chrysler is not going to make it, especially not in this world where electric vehicles are becoming more and more common and all of the major manufacturers are scrambling to compete with the likes of Tesla. Chrysler is irrelevant. And I think Chrysler's Pacifica was their last-ditch attempt at staying relevant by offering a new minivan for the American market, but like nobody drives minivans so much anymore, and the people who do are not looking for Chrysler to give them the answers like they may have done with the Town and Country. I mean, it's just, why? Like, anyway, let me not get off track. So essentially only two vehicles, and the Chrysler 300. Now, the thing is, I really like the Chrysler 300. I always have. My problem with it is the fact that it's not of good quality because it is a Chrysler product. The Chrysler 300 is gorgeous. I mean, if we're talking about styling, Chrysler has really done a great job with styling. Like, I would like to hire whoever styles Chrysler cars and have them style a car for me, because Chrysler cars have been gorgeous. I mean, yeah, all that glitters ain't gold, but you know what? If we're looking for pure beauty, I would say Chrysler's lineup is definitely beautiful, and they are unashamed to show that. I mean, the 200, as terrible of a sedan as it was nice. It was sloped back. It looked European. I mean, it was really pretty. So that's Chrysler's lineup. Like I said, it spells the beginning of the end. Jeep is the most successful Chrysler marque. Chrysler itself doesn't have any crossovers. The 300C, or just the plain 300, I should say. C is a model of the 300. The Chrysler 300 has only Cadillac left to compete with as far as American luxury sedans go. So, yeah, that's a problem. As if though Chrysler doesn't have enough problems. You have the American sedan rapidly dying. You have the American luxury sedan even dying quicker than the average American sedan. And then you have Chrysler competing against Cadillac as far as sedan goes. So the Chrysler 300 being I want to say it's a full size. I think it's classified as a mid-size though. Being a mid-size is going to compete against the CT5 and the CT6. The CT6 being Cadillac's full size, depending on where Chrysler falls in, the Chrysler 300 falls in Chrysler's lineup. So you have those two. And I'm not saying that Cadillac is bad. Cadillac is not bad. But Cadillac has been trying real hard to chase the German rivals, like I mentioned before. So Cadillac is inevitably going to be upping their game. Cadillac is not what it used to be. And Chrysler is not what it used to be. Cadillac has gotten better. Chrysler has gotten worse. So the fact that the Chrysler 300 is even a competitor to the CT5 is kind of comical, because you have two cars that, even though they are luxury cars built in America for the American market, so they are American luxury sedans by definition, they couldn't be more different from each other. Because the companies that produce them also couldn't be more different from each other. So you have the Chrysler 300 that is sort of lost. It doesn't have any competition. And because it doesn't have any competition, because everybody's moving away from that segment, it's left all alone. Nobody cares about the luxury sedan anymore here in America. Far and wide, people are buying more crossovers. This has been an upward trend that we have seen for the past several years, which is why GM is killing almost all of their sedans. Ford is killing almost all of their sedans. And so many other car companies here in America are not offering sedans anymore because nobody wants them. So the fact that Chrysler is still offering a sedan, it makes it questionable. Is Chrysler reading the writing on the wall? Has Chrysler woken up to smell the coffee. Is Chrysler going to do anything, or is Chrysler going to let themselves steadily continue downhill in terms of quality? I hope that's not the case, but it appears to be so. So, yeah, Chrysler doesn't stand a chance compared to Cadillac as far as the 300 goes. Chrysler could have banked on the name recognition of the Town and Country and introduced a new generation of it. You've already heard me rant about that. But let me just dissect this a bit more. I am a student of marketing, of public relations, of mass communications, to a lesser extent of advertising and those disciplines. That's what I studied in my undergraduate. You will find that this is a very poor marketing move on Chrysler's part. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Let's just mull over that for a little bit. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. The Town and Country name wasn't broke. It wasn't broken, to use proper English. And they decided to fix it by bringing back a broken name and applying it to something that is not broken, thus losing the name recognition that the Chrysler Town and Country had. You've seen it done several times. Chevy, which is owned by GM, has had the Chevy Suburban as the longest running nameplate of any American automobile. The Chevy Suburban is running, I think, on 80 or 90 years of production. It's a far cry from what it used to be. But GM knew the name recognition of Suburban, so they continued producing the Suburban, even if at some point it was a station wagon. Now it's a full-size body-on-frame SUV. They continued with the name for name recognition purposes. Chrysler could have done the same thing with the Pacifica, just offered a new body style. It's not uncommon for car manufacturers to introduce a new generation of their vehicle after 5-6 years. Toyota does it all the time. The Toyota Sienna of today is not the Toyota Sienna of the 90s. So why did Chrysler feel like instead of introducing a next generation of the Town and Country, they had to do away with the Town and Country in room for the Pacifica? And get this. Get this. This is what's even funnier, is that when they first introduced the Pacifica, they were still producing the Town and Country alongside the Pacifica. So there was a time you could walk into a Chrysler dealership for that brief overlap between the two models that you could buy a brand new Town and Country or a brand new Pacifica. I mean, if that isn't confusing as I'll get out, goodness, I don't know what is. Why? I mean, if you're going to kill it, at least kill it completely. Kill it dead. Don't kill it semi-dead and then offer the new rival or the new replacement right next to the one that was never as successful to begin with. I mean, it's just, it doesn't make any sense. They also killed the Grand Caravan from Dodge, and they replaced it with the Voyager. The revival of the Plymouth Voyager, which, as we all know, Plymouth went under in 2002, presumably because they didn't have a market segment anymore. Chrysler was done dumping money into it, and they were not unique vehicles. They were just cheap Dodges. Plymouth was at the bottom of the line, then you had Dodge, then you had Chrysler, kind of like you had Ford and then Buick, and not Ford and Buick, Ford, Mercury, and then Lincoln. So that's kind of how Chrysler's lineup used to be for the longest while. So they brought back the name of the Plymouth Voyager, called it the Chrysler Voyager now, and then and then now it's gone to replace the Dodge Grand Caravan, which was a very iconic Dodge that has always been the sister vehicle to the Town and Country, albeit a bit cheaper and in some cases a bit sportier. So it seems like Chrysler Corporate has forgotten the Chrysler mark under Fiat Chrysler. They've forgotten it. Chrysler could easily be absorbed into Dodge once good Chrysler, I can't even read my notes, honestly. I'm just so sad. Could be easily absorbed to Dodge. Chrysler could just be easily absorbed into Dodge. That's what happened with Packard and Studebaker back in the day. I mean, Packard was floundering, so they came under Studebaker's wing, and then, came under Studebaker's wing, and then Packard was obviously never the same again. They became known as Packard Bakers. That wasn't their official name. That was their, kind of nickname that they gained in the car enthusiast community. So Chrysler could just be absorbed into Dodge. Nothing that Chrysler offers is special anymore. Nothing that Chrysler offers is like, oh, wow, that's cool. Nobody cares. Chrysler should just be easily absorbed into Dodge, and Dodge should soldier on as the flagship brand for Fiat Chrysler at this point, because Chrysler's boiled down to two vehicles. And the thing is, what brought me to even do this episode on Chrysler was the fact that I am in several number of car groups on Facebook, car pages, but there's this one called Unpopular Car Opinions, like not car opinions, but car opinions. And the man gave a list of brands that basically should die, in his opinion. And Chrysler was near the top of that list. And that was like, you know what? I'm going to actually find out more about this. I'm going to do the research. What has happened to Chrysler? So please stay tuned for segment 3, in which I discuss the history of Chrysler. Like I said, from the days of Walter P. Chrysler back in 1926, to the days of the illustrious Imperial, to the days of the struggling K-Car, to the days of the odd cab-forward design, and to today's days where the good name of Chrysler has been soiled. So please stay tuned for the next segment. I will see you after the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back, my beloved car people. This is segment 3, and we are going to be discussing the history of Chrysler. Just to preface this, there is something we know as the big 3 in the American car world. You have GM, Ford, and Chrysler. They have been the big 3 for as long as I can remember. And they cemented their spot as the big 3 after AMC went under, I believe, in the late 70s, early 80s. Because AMC had always been the 4th American car company. Was never as big as the other 3, but still was making headway. But since AMC went under, these have basically been the big 3, so to speak. Chrysler is younger than GM. Chrysler is younger than Ford. Chrysler was started in the 1920s by Walter P. Chrysler, and I believe their first headquarters was in New York, not in Detroit, like so many other American car companies were. The mission was to produce an affordable luxury car, in which they did for a very long time. And not only did they produce luxury sedans, their lineup included station wagons, their lineup included convertibles, their lineup included sports cars, their lineup included a whole host of very different, very exciting automobiles for a very long time. And they made some legendary cars as it is. American car history would not be what it is if it were not for Chrysler, which just makes it even sadder, in my opinion, that Chrysler has gone this way, because Chrysler had so much potential. I mean, American car companies, American car history, American cars in general have Chrysler to thank for a lot of things. The Chrysler Airflow. The Chrysler Airflow was one of the first mass-produced aerodynamically designed cars in days where there were fenders and headlights that stood straight up and things where cars were mostly functional in their design, never really taking into account airflow and aerodynamic ability. This was what Chrysler did. They designed the Chrysler Airflow. And I believe there was a DeSoto Airstream as well, which DeSoto used to be another mark in the Chrysler car company that went under, I believe, in like the 1950s. But there was the Chrysler Airflow and the DeSoto Airstream, if I am not mistaken on that. These cars, hence their names, were designed with aerodynamics in mind. These cars were beautiful. These cars were great. They were way ahead of their time. I mean, cars didn't start being designed with aerodynamics in mind, especially American cars, until much later in the scene. Chrysler basically pioneered, I guess, aerodynamic automobile design here in America, at least. This was a big deal. This was a big deal. People, of course, at the time weren't ready for such a big change, but that doesn't lessen Chrysler's impact on car design and car technology, on car engineering for several decades to come. The Chrysler turbine car, or turbine car, I should say, not turban like something you wear on your head, but the turbine car, was a concept car. If you actually watch Jay Leno's Garage, he's got a whole episode on the Chrysler turbine car. The Chrysler turbine car, if I was ranting about the Chrysler Airflow, the Chrysler turbine car is something straight out of the Jetsons. I mean, it used a jet engine. That's literally what it used. It did not use a traditional cylinder engine, and it did not use a rotary engine either, which are the two types of engines for cars. It used basically an engine that you would find in the jet. It revved to something ridiculous, like 22,000 RPM or something like that. It could run on any sort of fuel that was combustible, and it was a new approach. It was a new approach to car technology, car design, car anything, really. It was a completely new approach, which I commend Chrysler for doing, because to my knowledge, this is the only car company in the history of the world to ever stuff a jet engine inside of a car and actually make a working model and actually consider putting it into production. What made this car not go into production was the fact that it wasn't very fuel efficient. Even though it could run on any sort of combustible fuel, it wasn't fuel efficient. So it was going to come out at a bad time, because this was the mid to late 60s. The oil crisis of the 70s was not too far off. I mean, Chrysler could never put it into production because it was too ahead of its time, if I could put it that way. this is a largely forgotten concept car. I mean, we tend to think of the GM LeSabre concept. We tend to think of like the concept cars from Ford. We tend to think of the Buick Y Job as some of the more amazing American concept cars of years past. But we completely forget the Chrysler turbine car. The Chrysler turbine car blows all of these out of the water. The Chrysler turbine car blows any concept car out of the water, especially because of the time that it came out in, because of the technology associated with it, because of the idea, because of everything. The Chrysler turbine car, in my book, is the most amazing concept car ever produced by a car company on the history, or on the face of the earth, in the history of the world. I mean, the Chrysler turbine car was amazing. Just imagine if this had actually caught on, what we would be driving today. I mean, heck, flying cars could have been more common than they are today. I mean, flying cars are impractical. Flying cars are not really mass produced, and flying cars will never catch on. But if this jet engine car caught on, who knows? Maybe we would have Chrysler to thank for flying cars. We will never know, though, unless we lived in some sort of alternate universe, which is, philosophically impossible. But anyway, moving on. We have the Chrysler Town & Country. That is a legendary automobile produced by Chrysler. Let me define what I mean by it was legendary. In the days of Chrysler coming out with the Town & Country, in the days of Chrysler basically redefining itself for the up-teens time at that point, Chrysler did something that was great, I believe, under the leadership of Lee Iacocca. Lee Iacocca, may he rest in peace. I mean, American car history has, Lee Iacocca is like one of the grandfathers of American car history, up there with Henry Ford, up there with Ransom E. Olds, up there with Henry M. Leland. I'm going to put him with those people because he's up there with them. I mean, he's done so many great things. But that's my short rant about Lee Iacocca. But he basically invented a new class of automobiles, the minivan. The minivan lives on today as, well, the minivan, but more spiritually as the crossover SUV. Because this was the family car of choice for several decades. And the minivan basically dethroned the station wagon as the American family car of choice. These were the days before SUVs grew to the size that they are today, and that they were considered family cars, and that they were given much thought and luxury to. This was still the 80s. Chrysler didn't have a luxury SUV. At the time, Jeep was owned by AMC, so Jeep's Grand Wagoneer was not a Chrysler product. Chrysler came out with the minivan for Chrysler, for Dodge, and for Plymouth as the Voyager, and it ushered in a new class of automobiles. It dethroned the station wagon, and like I said before, it lives on today spiritually as one of the most practical ways to haul your family around. Think of it. The station wagons were based off of exclusively sedan platforms. Station wagons were not very tall. Station wagons were basically stretched sedans with a cargo area over the rear. I love station wagons, but station wagons are not as practical as minivans. Minivans had a sliding door to make access easier to enter and easier to exit. Minivans had captain's chairs in the front row, captain chairs in the middle row, and that you may be able to walk into your minivan and then walk to the rear bench seat. So a minivan at the time held at least 6 people, if not 7. I've been in in minivans of that early Chrysler era. Our neighbors that used to live downstairs from us way back in the early days of my childhood, when I used to live in New Jersey, they had a Plymouth Voyager, I believe. And this was a great vehicle for hauling family around. I still remember riding it. I mean, this is part of Americana. I know very few people who don't know what a Chrysler Town and Country is, because it is cemented itself as the quintessential American family vehicle. That, along with the Dodge Grand Caravan, and in the days of the Plymouth Voyager. When you usher in a new class of automobiles, I mean, and make it as successful as they did, and make it as reliable as they did. I know that's really odd that I would be mentioning Chrysler reliability, because Chrysler reliability has been virtually non-existent for the past 40 years, but these minivans were reliable. You see them, several of them, with over 200,000 miles on them, still kicking. I mean, they may not look the best, but they are still running. Chrysler, and they even got to a point where you can get a Chrysler Town and Country with a removable table for the back 2 rows that you can swivel the chairs and then face towards the table and then play games as your parents are driving you along on your family road trip. I mean, that is amazing. That's amazing. No other minivan did that, and no other minivan has done that since. They had a removable table in the back of the Chrysler Town and Country. They had fold-away seats that fold flat into the floors. Wow. I mean, the Chrysler Town and Country, I'm not a minivan person, but I've ridden in 2 of them, at least 2 variants of that platform. There was the Chrysler Town and Country that I rode in back when I was in high school, because someone at my church owned one. And then there was the Plymouth Voyager that I rode in way as like a 4 or 5 year old when I used to live in New Jersey. And they were amazing. I still have fond memories, and my parents never owned a minivan, but that's how great the Chrysler Town and Country was. And then the Chrysler Imperial, the illustrious Chrysler Imperial, another legendary automobile. Did you know that the Chrysler Imperial was the largest unibody car ever constructed? The Chrysler Imperial was on par with Cadillac's Fleetwood and Lincoln's Continental. This was a huge deal back in the day. For you to own a Chrysler Imperial, you were basically on par with Cadillac. And not only that, Chrysler Imperials were stunningly gorgeous. I can't say that Chrysler automobiles have ever been ugly. I can't. Of course, every car company has its flops as far as design goes, but Chrysler Imperials were stunningly gorgeous. I mean, there was a time that the Chrysler Imperial had freestanding headlights, which made it look futuristic, with a trapezoidal grille in the middle. I mean, some people weren't into that. I thought it was absolutely beautiful, and I still think it's absolutely beautiful. This was an American luxury sedan, a proper American luxury sedan. I mean, you think of the Imperial, it sounds regal. I mean, this is an Imperial. This is no other regular automobile. The Chrysler Imperial lasted, I believe, until the 1970s. And in fact, it wasn't the Chrysler Imperial, it was the Imperial. It was a separate mark from Chrysler, even though it's remembered as the Chrysler Imperial. It really should be Chrysler's Imperial instead of the Chrysler Imperial, but I digress. Basically, they hit a financial crisis. Lee Iacocca introduced the K car, and that was basically a versatile platform that many different cars could be built on, everything from convertibles to station wagons, not to be confused with the K car in Japan, which is a class of lightweight automobiles that are taxed differently because they are lightweight. Chrysler somewhat recovered and made some pretty interesting cars in the 90s and the early 2000s. This was the cab over design that maximized interior room, which was actually pretty successful for them. The Concorde, the Sebring, the 300M, and the New Yorker. And there were some more interesting cars yet from Chrysler that included the Chrysler Crossfire, the Chrysler TC by Maserati. Yes, Chrysler, this is not the only time that they have merged with, or they've collaborated with Italian car companies, which is unironic. And they even merged with Mercedes-Benz in the late 90s and the early 2000s. This caused Mercedes-Benz quality to suffer, and it was short-lived, and now Chrysler has now unironically latched on to the Italian brands such as Fiat, Lancia, or as I like to say it, Lancia, but I know that's not how it's pronounced, Alfa Romeo, and Maserati. All of them have a similar reputation for quality. It's bad quality. Italians have never been known for making good cars. They make very pretty cars. Their cars live by the motto, live fast. Live fast, die young, leave a sexy corpse. That's the Italian car. And Chrysler has basically adopted that for the American market too. I mean, Fiat means fix it again, Tony. So now you have Fiat and Chrysler. Fiat, fix it again, Tony, and then Chrysler, which is basically the American Fiat. So there you have it. Sorry I had to rush through the last bit of Chrysler history right there, but that's basically Chrysler history. Now they are some Italian merger, and they are just part of the group of struggling automobiles struggling to stay relevant in the cutthroat market that is today. So please stay tuned for the last segment, in which I will give you my opinion on Chrysler, and I will give you my honest opinion too, which I not everybody knows what my honest opinion on Chrysler is. So please stay tuned after the break.
Do you work in the world of marketing and advertising? Are you a media buyer or the owner of an agency? Have you been looking for a podcast to help stay on top of all the goings-on of those worlds? The GSMC Marketing News Podcast is dedicated to keeping you up to date on all things concerning marketing and advertising. Get the latest marketing news, from what major businesses have planned for the coming year to the newest trends in advertising, from podcasts, digital and streaming, to the old standbys of radio, television, and billboards. The GSMC Marketing News Podcast has you covered, whether you're a marketing agent or a business trying to expand your brand.
All right. Segment 4 is here. It has finally arrived. This is my opinion of Chrysler. I am not fond of Chrysler. I know. It's a shocker. Like I haven't mentioned how Chrysler has been floundering in so many of my other podcasts, and I haven't mentioned basically how Chrysler is floundering again in this podcast. I made an entire podcast about it. But it's not that I choose to not be fond of Chrysler. It's the fact that I appreciate quality so much. Quality and build quality and reliability when it comes to my cars. And Chrysler has not been able to offer that across any of its brands. Any car person, any car journalist, any car YouTuber can tell you that Chrysler quality is worrisome. And it makes me sad. It makes me sad because as I look back on car history here in the United States, like I mentioned, Chrysler made some legendary things that other car companies cannot lay a claim to. They simply cannot. Because Chrysler did it first, and Chrysler did it better than they could ever hope to have done. And then after the 70s, with Chrysler Imperial, it seemed that Chrysler doesn't offer anything good anymore. And part of me sees this as being Chrysler never really recovering very well after the fuel crisis. Obviously, the fuel crisis caused Chrysler to cancel the Imperial. They brought back the Imperial, and if only you can see my air quotes about this. They brought back the Imperial in the 80s, but this Imperial had a Mitsubishi engine. It was front-wheel drive. It was not the same Imperial. It was built off of a K-car platform. So basically, the Chrysler Imperial was the last great offering by Chrysler. I had done a whole entire podcast on American luxury sedans, the life, the death, and the legacy, or however I titled it, on the American luxury sedan. The traditional American luxury sedan, just to recap, officially died in 2011 with the last Lincoln Town Car. That was Ford. That was the last holdout. Chrysler, their last full-size body-on-frame a rear-wheel drive luxury sedan was the Chrysler Imperial back in the late 70s. And then Cadillacs was back in 1996 with the Cadillac Fleetwood. So Chrysler, I believe, after the oil crisis, killed Imperial and was really struggling financially because Chrysler never sold as much as Ford or GM did. And so Lee Iacocca came in and saved Chrysler from its financial crisis. The same Lee Iacocca that pioneered the Mustang, the same Lee Iacocca that invented, maybe not invented, but popularized the minivan, is the same Lee Iacocca that saved Chrysler, and is the same Lee Iacocca, rest his soul, that is flipping over in his grave after seeing what Chrysler has come into. Lee Iacocca came out with the K car. The thing is, I don't think anybody thought the K cars were good cars. The K cars were okay cars, and no pun intended on that, but they were meant to be okay. They weren't meant to be great. They weren't meant to be wonderful. They were meant to be okay. They were meant to get Chrysler out of its hole that it was in financially. And it did just that. You add cars such as the Dodge Aspen, the Plymouth Reliant, you add some Chrysler LeBarons were made off of the K platforms. I mean, these were the K cars. They had station wagons, they had convertibles, they had sedans. It brought a sort of new way of engineering the American automobile where you could have one platform and build several cars on that platform. And that was a great idea. And in some ways, it's been replicated since then. You have car companies today that they've got one platform and they build several cars on that same platform. Chrysler basically pioneered that in the days where it was not very common to do that. Chrysler just now has an outdated lineup. And like I said, Chrysler is on death watch. It will die within the next 10 years or so. Should Chrysler eliminate the name and keep Dodge and Jeep? Yeah, I think the answer to that question is yes. Maybe if they rename it to Mopar Fiat, because that's what Chrysler is known, their parts community is known as Mopar. Maybe they should rename it as Fiat Mopar or Mopar Fiat and just do away with the Chrysler name. There are certain things when they suffer for long enough, it's best to just let them go peacefully. Chrysler has suffered long enough. Chrysler will likely never come back to the greatness that it used to hold. And part of us just has to accept that. Part of us just has to accept the fact that Chrysler is not what it used to be. Chrysler will not be what it used to be. Chrysler is on its last leg. When you come down to the fact that you have two automobiles left, one of them is severely outdated, and the other one nobody cares about because the competition is just leaps and bounds better. It's time to pull the plug. It's time to pull the plug on Chrysler. I don't mean to sound doom and gloom. I don't mean to sound negative, but it might be it might be a positive thing for Fiat Chrysler to pull the plug on Chrysler, at least in the North American market, because they still sell rebadged Lancias in various areas of Europe as Chryslers. Maybe what Chrysler could do is focus their funds, instead of dumping it into a whole brand such as Chrysler, they can focus their funds on Dodge and Jeep. They can focus on making Jeep more exciting, and especially by, I guess, making Jeep more viable in the eyes of the new Ford Bronco, making Jeep more viable in the luxury SUV segment, and making more crossover Jeeps. And they can do some Dodge versions of those crossover Jeeps too. And they can keep Ram alive. I just lump in Ram under Dodge, even though it's technically not Dodge anymore. But I mean, I think that might be a good idea for Chrysler to do. Just kill the Chrysler name and focus those funds into Dodge and to Jeep, because Dodge and Jeep are still very popular. Fund them properly and work on new projects and reliability. There is not a car company out there at some point has not suffered from a reliability issue. Even Toyota had some cars that weren't very reliable. Chrysler can work on its reliability. It's not the be-all and end-all of Chrysler reliability. They need more crossovers. They need to keep their performance cars, because now they're some of the only American performance cars on the market, and they need more hybrids. They definitely need more hybrids, and they need plans for an electric car. Bring back the Viper as a mid-engined car to go against the C8 Corvette, and bring back the Wagoneer as a luxury SUV to go against the likes of the Lincoln Navigator and the Cadillac Escalade, which are both very popular. If Chrysler did that, I believe Chrysler would be able to save itself. And I think Chrysler would be able to save itself and keep itself relevant in the ever-changing car market. And maybe if they don't kill it forever, they can bring it back at some point in the future. But right now, if Chrysler is going to remain successful, I believe Chrysler is basically going to have to kill the Chrysler name, put it out of its misery, maybe keep it alive in Europe where it seems to be faring better than it is here in America. I don't know. That's just an assumption. But do that and basically reallocate the funds that used to be going into Chrysler to keeping it alive, and absorb it into Dodge, and invest money into Dodge, Jeep, and Ram to make them more reliable, to make them more appealing to the general public, and maybe save Mopar if you can't save Chrysler. I mean, sometimes you have to kill beloved car brands. GM had to kill Pontiac, which us GM folks, I'm one of them, we lament the death of Pontiac every day. I mean, sackcloth and ashes, gnashing of teeth, lamenting. People who are loyal to Chrysler, I can't think of anybody who's loyal to Chrysler still. But the few holdouts that there are, yes, they will weep. They will gnash their teeth. They will bathe in sackcloth and ashes. But there will be hope for the future if Chrysler can lay dormant for a while, focus on Dodge and Jeep, and maybe bring back Chrysler in the future when the timing is right. Yeah, that's basically my rant on Chrysler. We discussed the Chrysler Pacifica. We discussed the Chrysler Pacifica in light of Chrysler's aging and outdated lineup. We discussed the competitors. We discussed the history, the long storied legendary past of Chrysler. And we discussed my personal opinion. So yeah, thank you for listening. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And please share us and leave a comment, follow us. All those things really do help us. And so we say, thank you for listening to the GSMC Car Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. And thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the GSMC Car Podcast. part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type GSMC into your favorite podcast app to find all of the shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, from business news to weird news. Please subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode.